Good evening. My name's Kevin Hyland, and can I welcome you from wherever you're joining in the world. And it's a real pleasure to have you joining us on this panel tonight. This panel is organised by the G20 Interfaith Forum, and the subject tonight is human trafficking. Before we move on to the panel, can I just thank the Interfaith Forum, the G20 Interfaith Forum, for organising this, and in particular, Tyler Curtis from the communications team and Alison Ussery from the UK liaison for organising this event and bringing us all together. We've got a very interesting panel tonight, and during the sessions, I will be presenting the speakers, but their bios will also come up in the Q&A section or the chat section, which you can read at your leisure. So you can see people's bios on there also. There will be a Q&A session after each set of questions, and I would encourage people who are participating to use that freely. Let's get as many questions as we can to get the most out of this. And I will read out those questions and we will manage them. And so each speaker is going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes. And at the end of that, you will have a chance to ask them questions through the questions function. And then at the end, we will then be able to have a bigger discussion where we will talk about the issues that we're here to cover tonight. But I just want to put some context on this. We are talking about human trafficking, or modern slavery, as some call it. And there are estimates around the world that there are 40 million people suffering this. Many in different types: forced labor, domestic servitude, sexual exploitation. And some of it is going on in plain sight. Some of it is happening in business trades across the world. Some of it is ignored. Some of it is well known. But if we look globally, responses are relatively weak, with less than 1% of all victims being ever identified and even less criminals being pursued. It works out there's about a 99.98% chance to get away with this crime and a 99.5% chance of not being found. So our responses are poor. And we need to start to look at that. How do we open up people's hearts? How do we make sure policy is about people and that policy isn't just about trade and commerce? That written into policy is the need to protect people. And that's what we want to talk about. How can we make this a duty, not an option? And what role has faith got in making that happen? I just want to say a few words which Pope Francis said of this. He said it constitutes an unjustifiable violation of the freedom and dignity of the victims. That's our strong words. Those are strong words. But if we look at it, it's worse now than it was ever in history. And if we look around the world and we look at other areas, whether it's the airline industry, whether it's car manufacturing, we have standards. We have standards about the way we enter into airports. We have standards about food. We have standards about the quality of tires on a car. But where are the standards about the people involved in the mining for the batteries at the coltan, whether that's in Africa? What about the mica for the paint in the cars, which may come from India? What about the rubber that may come from Western Africa? And what about the clothes that are sewn in the Midlands in the UK in factories? How is it this is going on in plain sight, and yet millions and billions of dollars are the profits coming from that? The estimates are 150 billion US dollars every year. So it's time, I think, 21 years on from when the Palermo Protocol came in at the UN, 20 years on from the US legislation, 17 years on from the UK's first trafficking around sexual exploitation and migrant trafficking for forced labour. Why is it this has got worse? Why is it is carrying on? So are the measures we're using sufficient? Are the approaches we have doing the job? Or do we need to look again and start to think more about prevention? So I'm joined by a great panel tonight who will all present on that. And first of that panel I'm going to hand over to now is the Honourable Mr. Frank Heinrich, MP. Frank Heinrich is an academic, theologian, and social worker. After his studies, he became a Salvation Army officer and head of the Salvation Army in Chemnitz, Germany, where he lives. Frank is married to Regina, and they have 4 children. Since 2009, Frank has been a member of the German Bundestag with a focus on human rights and humanitarian aid, economic cooperation and development, as well as labour and social affairs. I would imagine you are very busy with the way the world's going at the moment, Frank. He is a titular member of the respective parliamentary committees. His special interests and competent areas lay in the fields of human trafficking, the disappearance of people, water as a human rights, Africa, children's rights and religious freedom. In 2013, he started a non-profit organisation called Together Against Human Trafficking as a founding member and chairperson. We're really delighted to have you with us and to see that parliamentarians around the world are doing such good work. So Frank, over to you now to hear your words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin, and greetings from Berlin. Now, as you have read all this, what shall I say about myself? Maybe I go back a little about my motivation, how I got here, and where my heart is on this. I was born and raised in the western part of Germany, but my parents moved quite often with us as a family to Romania, to other Eastern countries, which was still behind that Iron Curtain. And I remember that the feeling of freedom and not freedom was always burdening, and these differences. I had friends in prison. My first political thing that I ever did was protesting in front of the Romanian embassy because a friend of mine was in Romania in prison just because he had a Bible with him. And they just took him. And so freedom was always something. Now I became social worker in the first place. I became a Salvation Army officer in the second. And as you know, these topics that you said are so important for us in this discussion is poverty, food insecurity, conflict situations, poverty and poor education. And then we come into the subject that we will discuss. It's also corruption, migration. And in coming to East Germany, former Karl-Marx-Stadt, Chemnitz, my city now, I was pastoring, doing social work, got a voice for several issues as a Salvation Army officer. You can imagine which subjects they were. And accidentally, I must say, I never planned a political career. Accidentally, I stumbled into politics because this voice was heard, the news said something about it, and there was an open window or an open door that I got on the election nomination. And now I can be here for almost 12 years. And from the beginning in the Human Rights Committee, which is all my heart, and the social issues. And after a few weeks or months in Parliament, trying still to find out what's happening with me, I found out from friends, Christian and non-Christian friends, usually in the Human Rights Committee, we discuss things on all over the world. Thank God, it wasn't in Germany happening. But there was one issue they pointed me at, and that was the trafficking, especially for Germany, the human trafficking for sexual exploitation. So we sat around, made round groups, made this cooperation with now 35 organizations together against human trafficking. We found out numbers that in Germany, there are 1.2 million, and that's a number that I'm not guessing. It's a union, a trade union that gave it. 1.2 million transactions in the sex business are happening today, each day. Now, that market is, as you said in the beginning, Kevin, in the light for a certain extent, but the most of it is in the dark. So we started to dig, to raise awareness, to find a good way to approach the subjects. There was a big discussion in Germany, not just about that area of trafficking, but also in general, about the Supply Chain Act that we passed a few weeks ago, that will start to come into effect in the beginning of next year, which I find good because in the European Union, they will have to discuss it in the next year, in 2022, and this can be a lid for them to jump over. Now, as I'm also together, and I know one of our panelists is there too, Elona, Prroj, and I'm in the Evangelical Alliance, together with many pastors, churches. Some even are member in this group of Together Against Trafficking. But we still need a better way to approach, to make aware. Some people in Germany just don't want to know it. And when Christians come together, they always seem to smell that it is about morals. So we should, if we approach it, not go by the moral issue, but with human rights argumentations. As you said from the quote with the Pope, it's about human dignity of the victims, mostly the human dignity of women and children. And in the sexual business, it's this way, and in the supply chain laws, it's always the weak and the women. So what should we do, by my opinion, as faith people, not morally argumentation? We should become involved. Means there are many areas we can become involved. It's not just politicians that can. They need information. They need not just some votes for a certain act. And we need to be informed, not just me. We cannot just say, oh, this is a bad subject, and then yell it through the internet. We need to be really informed, because the opposition often, I mean, not the political opposition, but the people they are against this are in crime. They are busy. They are rich. In Germany, this business is richer in the dark part than the weapon and drug part together. So they know if somebody argues just morally on the one side or just weak on the other, they will take them and make that voice sound as nothing. So become involved. And we need to also look and talk into us. We cannot have an authentic voice to outside to this world, which we really need, but we have to talk it into us. And I know, as churches, as the kingdom of God, we are sometimes not through with these issues with ourselves. That starts with the tea on our table. It is that people from the church aren't asked to check the airline, whether they have an agreement that they won't participate in that, how they buy stuff, and even overlook the sex business area. So there's a voice that we should clarify and be better, but we also have to be the voice into us. That's my short comments to the beginning.
Thank you, Frank. And one question that's come up there is, you mentioned Supply Chain Act in Germany. Could you just give a little bit more of an explanation what that will be and what it will mean? Because obviously some countries have supply chain legislation that's been a step forward, but not that strong. How will it be in Germany?
Now, being a human rights person, I would have loved it to be more, but as it is a discussion because of economy on the one side and values on the other, and social, and many voices in it, and things that we haven't experienced, we made it, as people say, much stronger than in France and then in the Slavery Act. But still, we don't have that somebody who is missing points on the way as a company cannot be taken to court yet. There can be penalties. There can be, it's companies, just to say formally, it's companies from 3,000 and in a few years from 1,000 size, that should have that being proven. It is in the moment just for 1 or 2 steps back where the responsibility is on the company, and we are still discussing how to put it on the road, but it is much stronger than others. Just a few comments. Yes.
Thank you, Frank. And another question we've had come in is that your experience at trying to find allies in the Parliament, the Bundestag, do you feel there could be stronger legislation in the future with allies?
Now, as you know, we're having elections in a bit more than 4 weeks, and it depends on who will come out. And there are some parties that would go for a much stronger, but still they have to take economy and not just the voters, but also the buyers of things with them, the whole country, or then in maybe after next year, the whole Europe. Yes, there are allies, and there again, we needed to become better to discern which arguments are valuable or just, saying how bad it is, which is right, but we need to formulate it, and we need to transmit it or to transfer it into wording of laws that can really make a change and are not just, we say in Germany, white balm over it. So we need to take people their responsibilities, and we want to do it in the whole market chain. Maybe I see blockchain technology possibly help us very much in areas, first maybe in branches, textile, for example, or others, and later in regions that on each step they need to qualify for this. They have a certain time to qualify, and then it's green light, and then it's on the way green light. And then the people in the shop and the buyers and the sellers see a green light with this product. And I want to see that in the whole process. And we will get there. We get further. How far? I'm not sure. But even the big companies in Germany that are family-led are agreeing with more.
And one final question, really, and you've covered partly, but this is from the European Freedom Network, who are represented in many, many countries, particularly across the EU. If there was some points that they should be advocating for at the EU about due diligence, what would you suggest they actually come together on, and what would be the few points you would say would be a priority, but also, I suppose, acceptable and be looked upon favorably?
Oh, that's a big discussion, because if you have somebody else who was very much for this law, would tell you 2 or 3 other points. But I think we should, first of all, really make this law as practicable in German, so as usable as possible. Because if we spoil this possibility now, and then with the EU, we will not get a hand and a grip on it for the next 10 or 12 years. Now, maybe earlier, but I see it sometimes happen. So what I would want is that we really implement parts of our law that really the companies go smaller, because I would even ask for the people not just to take the size of the company, but maybe the size of the products that are coming into a country. That can be a little company of 15 people, but the amount of our products is much higher. Maybe to discern a little better than in the moment we in Germany did. And maybe to work with the banking systems as well, as the banks are right now helpful in the, I'm not saying sex trade business to block it, but in the porn industry, because many of them say we don't want to have flowing money into this if we don't know whether there is no trafficking happening. So look into that part too. But I cannot out of the blue say what would be the top 3 or 5. There must be a discussion, and EFN is in good contact with GGMH, Gemeinsam gegen Menschenhandel. So we need to discuss that even deeper.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you for your comments and the questions you've answered. Really good. We're looking, on today's discussion as well, at things like poverty, food insecurity, conflict, poor education, failing healthcare systems, corruption, inequality, migration, and climate change, and how, globally, those things end up with human trafficking and exploitation. And what can we do to address those? And that's why I'm so delighted that we're joined today by Reverend Dr. Luther Tarpeh from Liberia. Despite being born into abject poverty, Luther received his education through enormous sacrifice and determination, and, as he clearly says, with the help of God and his loving mother, who inspired him to walk through the jungle for 3 hours a day as a young boy. Luther's story is inspiring to many people across the world, and of course in his native Liberia, as he worked hard to learn and take himself out of vulnerability. Luther is a motivational speaker, speaking to several thousand across the country every week on his daily radio program. He runs a popular radio program called Insights for Successful Living on several radio stations across Liberia. He and his family work with vulnerable and orphan children and young people abandoned, exploited, and abused in society. His charity provides homes for them to live and opportunity to study and get an education. He is the proprietor of Best Brains Academy and is the president of Best Brains International University. On the national scene, he is the national board chairperson for all the commercial motorcycles and tricycles union in Liberia. Luther holds 3 master's degrees in biblical studies, political science, and international management and development from Liverpool in England, and is currently working on his doctoral dissertation. He is a lecturer at the AMEU University Master's Program, teaching courses in development and international politics, and a development analyst on DW Radio in Germany. He is married to Christina, and they are blessed with 3 children. Luther, it's a real pleasure to have you joining us today, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kevin, and great to be with you on this wonderful platform to discuss the problem of human trafficking. For me, let me put that into a proper perspective from my own story to kind of give a context of how I became very passionate about the problem of human trafficking. As you rightly say, Kevin, I was born in abject poverty. My father had 3 wives, and we are 27 from my father's end. And with that number, you could imagine how difficult it would be for a man to take care of all of his 27 children. But when I was born, my mom had a sense of direction because she was a Christian, and she felt that she only allowed me to grow up in a village where I would be like my brothers, my siblings, but she thought it was time for me to go to school. When she suggested that to my mom, my dad refused to let me go to school. But my mom, a Christian, I heard her many times praying that the Lord will move my father's heart to allow me to go to school. But after about 4 or 5 years, he still refused. I was almost around the age of 8, going 9, and I did not even know how to say the alphabets. And my mom had to take this radical decision one morning, hand my hand, and asked my dad if I could, he could permit me to go to school. And he said, no, if you leave from my village, I'm going to divorce you. And that's exactly what he did. And so my mom moved me into my grandmother's, her mom's village, where I had to walk to school 3 hours one way, 3 hours the other way. But with that background, I sensed that there were many African young people who really wanted to go to school, but I was blessed to have a mom who was a very godly woman who will even escort me through the jungle, almost like an hour, and allow me to cover the next 2 hours by myself. Her love, her motivation, her prayers kept me going through those many difficult years of my life. So I believe that those experiences of mine were not wasted. I thought that my mom influencing me to know Christ personally, and of course, to be able to cope with such enormous difficulties, I knew that I needed to give back and reach out to many other young people that were in such dilemma. Well, my mom was killed during the Civil War, and her last word to me was, now I did my best, helped you, educated you. Now, whatever God wants you to do, you go right ahead and do it. And so I'm seeing my life as being on a mission to be able to help many young people. So after the Civil War, several kids who lost their parents in the streets. When I returned from Nigeria, where I was privileged to go to school, I met many of these young people who lost fathers, mothers, practically living on the street. My wife, Christine, and I took them in our little house with our 3 children. And we're talking about 27 of those young boys and girls in 2 little rooms. And that's where we started. And we became father and mother to these kids. Now, in places like Africa, child trafficking is huge. I guess apparently because of the poverty and weak institutions. The corruption has exacerbated such social problems in Africa, in Liberia, to be precise, a country that have gone through a lot of devastation in the past 20 years. And when I took these young people in, I was flabbergasted when I approached government institutions to help send these kids to school, and many of them did not pay attention. So I saw this huge problem of children being exploited as the weakness of people pursuing money as opposed to human beings. And I guess our faith in God gives us the ability to look at people for who they are, the value that God placed on them, irrespective of their social status in society. And so Christine and I took these kids in, sent them to school. And now as I'm speaking, we've been doing this since 2007. Some of the kids we're talking are now in universities. Some of them have completed. Some are married, some have a job, and some have become a family person now. So looking back, I believe that to solve this problem of human trafficking, we need to be the voice for the voiceless out there. We don't need to be quiet. We need to speak. In addition to our prayers, we need to be vocal. On my radio platform that I speak to the entire nation, every morning and every evening, I'm always raising the issue of vulnerable children and girls who have been abused by companies because they're vulnerable. They cannot be protected. So I'm using that platform, and I think we who are the people of faith must be vocal. Every platform that God has given to us, whether in the church, whether you are lecturing, whether you are in parliament like Frank is, we have to be the voice for the voiceless. I believe that, but always mentioning that at some point, some of the leaders will definitely know how serious this is. And I think also the church needs to still go back. We need to mobilize funding from companies to be able to give back. Because when you have rescued these young people from the street or from sex predators, you have to host them, you have to feed them, you have to clothe them. So I think the church needs to allow the moral consciousness that was there once before to return. We need to be the feet, the hands, and the heart of Jesus Christ to these vulnerable people in the society. And not just, it's not all about money. We all need money, definitely. But society would definitely need men and women who will put people's interest, vulnerable who cannot speak, who cannot talk, who have no means of survival in the society. And I think this is where we can come in as a body of faith.
Thank you, Luther. And your story of your own history and your bio are quite inspiring to show, what a good person is, what a good man is. You are the model. But one thing I'd like to ask you, we have someone here from Germany, we have several people here from the United States. And one thing we know about Liberia is it is very rich in rubber plantations, which ends up on vehicles. One question we've got is, are those industries, because they're multi-billion-dollar companies or multi-billion euro companies, which are sold into our wealthy worlds, or our parts of the world in particular, do you have exploitation in those industries? Is that something that happens in Liberia?
Oh, absolutely, Kevin. For instance, the Firestone rubber plantation, at some point, it was the largest rubber farm in the whole world that produced rubber latex for tires around the world in all of the. And Firestone, I've been in Liberia since 1926. And it may surprise you that this company that I've been in Liberia for decades, it was just barely 10 years ago that Firestone was able to build a high school. They have this culture whereby the tappers, the rubber tappers, they pull them in a little cubicle with their family, maybe a one-room bedroom with their family. And so when they born their children, these kids who opt to go to school and become productive citizens will end up becoming rubber tappers, even at the age of 7, 8, 9. It was very recently that through our advocacy that great rubber companies stopped exploiting these kids. And for the first time since 1926, Firestone have to build a high school in Liberia. And thousands and thousands of workers who are there, the kids have not been able to maximize their potential because there were no schools. So as we keep talking and calling the government to book and asking them to intervene and not allow this level of exploitation to take place, they are yielding, even though it's slow, but it's coming. So yes, Kevin, to answer to your question, there are many rubber companies in Liberia that are exploiting kids, but we are advocating greatly.
And I think that's where the opportunities are for us to, you say one business has been there since 1926, to reinvest some of that wealth back into the source of their own revenue, to reinvest that in the country where they're based is so important, so that they are educating and giving back to the state that they're taking so much from. So thank you very much, Luther. Your words and your presentation were very inspiring. We're now going to move from Africa to the United States to the Reverend Professor Sarah Duggin. Sarah is an Episcopal priest and law professor. She serves as an associate rector at the St. John's Episcopal Church, Georgetown Parish, and as a member of the faculty of the Columbus School of Law of the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where she directs the Compliance Investigations and Corporate Responsibility Program and teaches constitutional law, corporate law, and corporate responsibility courses. And I've had the pleasure to participate in some of those, which are very inspiring and have been incredible with the students' involvement. She also teaches courses at Catholic University School of Canon Law. Sarah's scholarship focuses on the fields of constitutional law, corporate ethics, and the intersection of faith and corporate responsibility. And she is a frequent speaker and panelist in these areas. Prior to joining the law faculty, Sarah was a partner at the Washington, D.C. law firm of Williams and Connolly LLP, vice president and general counsel of the University of Pennsylvania Health System, and general counsel of the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, better known to most of us as Amtrak. Sarah, it's wonderful to have you here, and all your expertise in the business side, in education, and in faith are particularly valuable today. So great to see you.
Kevin, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to participate today. And I am honored to be on this panel with all of you doing so many wonderful things. I know that our focus is on many of the global factors that create environments that lead to the horrors of human trafficking and to labor exploitation and modern day slavery, poverty, food insecurity, conflict, inadequate educations, corruption, climate change. And I think those of us in the United States are seeing a little bit more about those these days, particularly with climate change issues. But I'd like to come at this a little bit as a parish priest and to focus on what I've observed and I think I'm guilty of myself, our failure to see what is happening in the world around us and to move forward in ways that make changes now. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we see. Christianity teaches us that we're all made in the image of God. And I think one of the things I find most profound about my faith is that Jesus truly saw people, especially those who were invisible to other people in his time, those who were poor, those who suffered from illness and injury. And he had compassion on all of those people and calls us to love one another in the same way as he loved us. And I think when you spoke earlier, Kevin, about a duty and an obligation, we as people of faith have a sacred obligation to see those who are in need and care for them as we care for ourselves. And that call to care for those who are most vulnerable has been part of the Judeo-Christian faith for millennia, from the words of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible to Jesus to modern day saints like Mother Teresa. But it's found in virtually all faith traditions and most non-religious ethical systems. And it does seem to me that the first step is to see with the eyes of love. And we're pretty good at not doing that in the United States sometimes. There are so many people doing wonderful work, but on a day-to-day basis, the men and women and children who are victims of human trafficking in all its forms are literally the most vulnerable people in our world. But to many of us in the United States, they are also among the most invisible. I don't think it's that most people fail to care. The criminals who are committing these horrendous crimes undoubtedly do, or they care more about themselves and their pocketbooks. But I think most people, particularly people of faith, really are suffering from the fact that it's too easy to turn a blind eye to the suffering in our cities and on our farms. We have all sorts of exploitation in the vast farms in our dairy areas in New York and New England and across our Midwest. And we see cases repeatedly about that, but it's all too easy to forget that. And it's too easy to ignore the true human costs of the products we use every day, whether they're produced by our own employers or they're produced by employers we buy from, by companies we buy from. And we don't take the steps we need to figure out if what we are consuming involves products like mica or rubber or whatever else that is produced at a terrible human cost. And I've been spending a lot of time wondering, why don't we see this? Why do we fail to perceive the plight of those who are caught up in human trafficking and victimized by modern day slavery? Why do we sometimes look away? And I think in one way or another, that's what we're all puzzling over and trying to address. So I'm very thankful for all of the great
Sarah,
work.
I don't know if everybody else, we've lost your sound at the moment.
Oh.
I don't know if
Oh dear.
you're back now, you're back.
Okay, all right, sorry, I sent you all a note, my internet's unstable at school, I'm sorry, I guess it's our first week of classes, I apologize. I was just gonna say, I think that most Americans have an idea of sex trafficking, although most of us don't know what to do about it, and we don't generally understand enough about other kinds of trafficking or the toll that this kind of thing, this horror exacts in so many vulnerable people. We're failing to see our brothers and sisters. And when people of good faith and good people of no faith try to figure out what to do, we're struggling to identify and address trafficking on a grassroots level, and we get frustrated. So too many people throw up their hands and they stop getting information about the integrity of supply chains. There'll be a faddish kind of, okay, one company gets a bad reputation. None of us buy from there for a while, but we don't keep it up. We don't confront the ugly realities that are out there in the world that are contributing to the victimization of our brothers and sisters. And in the United States, we've been preoccupied with other issues of late, the shattering of our illusions about being part of the land of the free and the brave, because we've recognized in a very large way the ugly realities of systemic racism and ongoing discrimination. And we're engaged in some pretty bizarre political battles over vaccines and other aspects of the COVID pandemic. But I think most of all, the problem is a lack of practical education that both Mr. Heinrich and Reverend Tarpeh spoke a little bit about. But I think the good news is that we can change. There's great work being done by journalists, by religious organizations, and our seminaries need to keep training clergy to be aware of these evils. You do not find a lot of sermons about human trafficking in the United States, as far as I can tell. I went trolling on the internet, trying to find some statistics. I think we need to be training people of faith, particularly faith leaders, to engage, because when we deal with people as churches, synagogues, temples, mosque, we have access to a vast array of people. And even those who don't come to our sanctuaries often listen to what we say. So I'd like to suggest 3 things that perhaps people of faith can do, or perhaps do better. And inherent in all of these is recognizing that love is a verb, it's active. As Kevin, you said, it opens people, we have to open people's hearts. And I think we need to do that with practical education. There are a lot of good materials out there, but religious traditions need to prioritize human trafficking and urge parishes, congregations to engage in this kind of training and education. We are doing it now with race in the United States. It took us long enough, but we're finally doing it. We need to do the same kinds of things with human trafficking. So I'd suggest that houses of worship all need to become more welcoming. Many of us are in cities or in rural communities where, even whether here in the United States, we have documented cases of human trafficking in every one of our 50 states and our nation's capital. We need to help our people learn to see what's around them and encourage them to spread the word. We need to publicize resources such as our National Trafficking Hotline. And we need to create a model for all people of how we can, as people of faith, address this problem. I think we also need to call for accountability. Reverend Tarpeh spoke about Firestone and about the issues of never reinvesting in the people who are making goods and products available. We know from the past that consumer awareness brings huge market power. Years ago, when Nestle was selling baby formula throughout much of the world that led to terrible results for infants, we were able to muster the strength and the support to say, we're going to boycott. We're not going to buy your products, but we need some strong laws on transparency to help people get that information, or we need to develop, as people of faith, information networks that can make that available so the people in the pews and the people they know can muster this market power. My particular interest is in business accountability. And when I try to find statistics of how many sermons are preached in our houses of worship in this country about the importance of business ethics in the marketplace, the number hovers well below 5%. And it's estimated that clergy encounters very rarely have to do with the ethics of our workplaces, the companies that we work for, that some of us run, and their ethics. We need to change that as people of faith. In our pews, we have business people, we have legislators, policymakers, bankers, teachers. One thing that's happening in the US now is all teachers across the board, from our very youngest kids to law school classrooms and graduate classrooms, we're being asked to incorporate race issues in all of our teaching. We're doing that. And again, it's about time, but human trafficking disproportionately affects people of color too. And it's occurred to me that I need to do more to educate our students on these issues, and that we have these platforms, we should be using them. And finally, I'd say we have to engage even more in policy issues, but not only at the denominational level. We need to encourage our congregants to do that, to seek greater supply chain transparency, to seek greater regulation, and make it clear that this is a faith-based imperative. I really do believe that we can do better. We're seeing churches and other religious traditions lead the way on civil rights in the United States. That's happened again and again, and it's happening right now. I think we need to do the same for human trafficking. And I'd just like to close by saying, in his letter to the church at Ephesus, St. Paul wrote, God's power acting in us and through us can do far more than we can ever ask or imagine. In the United States, Howard Thurman, the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, is often recognized as the theologian of our civil rights movement. And he put it a little bit differently, and something that I think resonates with what Reverend Tarpeh said. Do not be silent. There's no limit to the power that may be released through you. I think that's the message that people of faith, particularly those of us who are clergy and lay leaders in denominations, need to get out. We cannot be silent, and we can fight human trafficking and modern day slavery. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Some very good words, very wise words there. Well, one question that's come in, and I encourage people to ask more questions of the panels. Why is it do you think that, from the places of worship, that we're not hearing clergy or religious leaders talk about ethics in the workplace? What do you think is stopping it? Is it just they don't know? Is it because they can't relate it to, the books of faith, or is it, just in the too difficult tray?
This is kind of a personal issue for me. I do think that it's because we're not doing enough in religious training to equip clergy people and lay leaders to have these kinds of discussions, to preach these kinds of sermons, to run these kinds of programs. We ran one at my parish, and we had tremendous attendance, and found that there was a whole untapped yearning for people to talk about, well, my company is producing this product. I'm worried that people are working in bad conditions in other places in our supply chain. I'm worried that we're not treating our workers well here in the United States or elsewhere. I'm worried about some folks who are out there. And we found that there was a kind of untapped need for that. But when I have looked I actually went through and looked at seminary education curricula, it's just beginning. It is beginning, but we're just beginning to get these kinds of ethical considerations. And I think it's because most clergy people don't come to the clergy from business backgrounds. Some do, but many don't. And I think that it's hard to connect business ethics in a way that really makes a connection to our daily lives. I think there is a whole tradition of Jewish business ethics that is really remarkable and really good. And I think the rest of us need to get engaged in that kind of work. And we need to encourage people to talk about these issues. In the United States, at least, we have a lot of concerns about confidentiality, which are well-founded. But I think we can find ways in churches, in synagogues, and other places to let people talk about this issue and encourage them to do so, and encourage them to keep their own businesses accountable as a matter of faith and morality. And I don't think we've done enough of this. And I think we need to keep working on this issue and try to get it forward. I have written on this issue, trying to encourage other people to do that.
And one thing I, would like to ask you about is, I don't know, I think you may have looked at the Australian Modern Slavery Act.
Yes.
And of course, that's got legal requirements of companies to report. Doesn't really have any sanctions other than you can be put on a kind of a watch list, as it were, that you're a rogue trader in a sense, because you haven't done your report. But the Archdiocese of Sydney has, incorporated all its network of, hospitals, schools, and parishes, and come together to present and produce a very clear model of what an anti-slavery statement should look like and what they can do within their own influence and their own financial, mechanisms, or whether that's money they're spending or actions they're taking. Do you think there's more that church could do, looking inwards as well about its own supply chains?
I think that the Archdiocesan program out of Sydney is terrific. And I hope that we in the United States will find ways to follow that. And one of my colleagues, Mary Leary, is working on many of those issues. I think that's a great start. I do think, though, that we have to go at this in a variety of ways. I think stronger laws are really important. From what we've seen, even with the conflict minerals reporting requirements in our now about 10-year-old Dodd-Frank legislation in the United States, the California Supply Chain Transparency Act, it is so easy for companies simply to do the reports and move on. It's so easy for companies to comply with these laws and not really do anything about it, because most people can get very frustrated. I get frustrated trying to track down on a company's website what it's actually had to say, and I find most of it to be boilerplate language that really tells me very little about what's actually happening. So I think those kinds of laws need more teeth in them, and they have to make it much easier for ordinary people to access that kind of information. I do think, though, that the Sydney Archdiocese model of trying to incorporate the new legal standards into what they are doing and to try to urge others to do that is really important, because I think we need to keep working on business leaders and the rank and file of business people to buy into this and to really feel energized and motivated to do that. And again, I see people saying, I tried to go to a website, I tried to figure this out, and I just can't do it. And we have to find ways to make that information more accessible. I think that's something we can do. And in a sense, you asked if that's looking inward. I think it is, because I think it's looking into who we are and what we are, who we are as a community, as the body of Christ for me, and saying, what are we doing to help those among us? And that's your responsibility, and yours and mine, and all of our responsibilities. And I don't hear that enough. I don't say it enough, and we need to do more.
Thank you, Sarah. And one question we got, which has come from the CEO of Hope for Justice, which came from faith-based group, but now works with police and all different agencies around the world. They're asking, should we have a day where we talk about and pray for, freedom? Should we create a Freedom Sunday?
Well, I think, there's already an international day that I think began in 2014 out of the Vatican. So I think that's a great idea. I think probably we all need to do more. Yeah. sometimes we don't do as well as we should in some ways in the United States with reaching out to one another. I think that's a great idea. And I think it would put a whole new emphasis on it. In the United States, and I guess around the world, Earth Day really helped focus. It didn't solve the environmental problem, but it helps us focus. And most churches in the United States, I believe, do focus on Earth Day and talk about care for creation. We need to talk about care for our brothers and sisters. And so I think that really focusing, I believe the day was July 30th, but I will be honest, I don't think it got nearly as much publicity in the United States as it could. And I think we could all help with that.
Yeah, and the date from the Vatican is the 8th of February, which is St. Josephine Bakhita's Saint's Feast Day. Yeah, and I entirely agree with you. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. We're now going to move back to Europe, to Albania, and we're joined by Dr. Elona Prroj. She's the Vice President of the Evangelical Alliance of Albania and the lead pastor of Word of Christ Church. She is the founder and the director of No Blood Feud, Yes to Life Foundation, a foundation which is very active in the fight against blood feuds, providing holistic care for families that suffer from this phenomenon in the north of Albania. She is also a board member of World Vision Leadership in Albania and Kosovo, and the regional director in Albania and Kosovo for the International School of Ministry. Last year, the president of Albania awarded Elona with Mother Teresa Gold Medal for the humanitarian work she does in the nation. Congratulations on that. She holds a doctorate degree in psychology. Elona is a public speaker internationally, particularly in the subject of forgiveness and reconciliation. She has addressed this topic in different conferences and platforms throughout the world, including the EU Parliament in Brussels and the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. Great to see you, Elona, and thank you for joining us this evening.
So I want to, I'm really thankful for inviting me in this panel, and I have enjoyed all the talks here, and I totally agree with everything that my brothers and sisters shared about this topic. I want to start with one experience I had in the European Prayer Breakfast. As I was in Brussels, one of my friends invited me on a Friday evening to go in Place de l'Issière, and she was not telling me anything about this. So she's just challenged me, come and we will see something together. So I went there in Brussels, and it is like a road of 2 to 3 kilometers. And I met about 32 girls, and they were trafficked, and they were prostituting in this road. And out of the 32 girls, 30 of them were Albanians. I am sorry, and I feel in shame to say that I didn't know that kind of reality. And it shocked me knowing that this was like a big issue. You know, I knew before that Albania is like a source country for human trafficking, forced labor for children, and forced begging for children. But that was, you know, that was an experience and a moment that made me think more and pray more about what is happening in this kind of area. So the next year I brought my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, with me to go and meet the girls there because I really wanted not just my daughter, but also the people around to not approach these girls with this moral issue, but to see beyond that what make them go and do this. So I totally agree with all the elements that you have brought there, you know, like what makes the human trafficking goes on. And as I am serving God in the north of Albania, you know, with families that are prisoned in the house because of the blood feud, and not only them, but even other families, like poverty will be a big issue, but not only that, the violence in the family and the inequality, the gender inequality, when girls are subject of the violence from their fathers. And also we in the north of Albania, we would have a saying like girls are born in a foreign house, and then they go in their own house when they get married. So their father's house is like a foreign house for them. So in an environment like this, you can expect that the first men that will give attention to these girls will be they will go, and they will just approach and have their way out of the violence of their dads and the inequality, the gender inequality in the family and the poor education. Like it is a way of escaping from all this kind of environment. As we work with our foundation, we have discovered like 5 years ago that in these families, they will invest more in sons than in daughters, because the sons are the inheritance of the families. And so education for their daughters, it will be like putting their money away, like wasting their money educating their daughters in this kind of families. And we have started in our foundation, we started to do a survey every summer with the families that we work, that we can identify girls that will finish their primary and secondary school. And we go and just mediate with the fathers, and we provide support that they will continue education, at least even the high school. So we have been successful with about 5 girls. I know that this is not a big encouraging number, but to me it's like we are called to save one life at a time with what we have in our hands today. Sometimes we get discouraged because we think that our work, it has to be massive, and it is a good thing to be massive, but it starts small with the people that we have around us, and by identifying the most vulnerability children and girls and boys. In the situation that we live here in Albania, with all these numbers of sex trafficking that we have as a source country, it is like it is so sad to see that not so many churches or organizations or even the government is involved in helping and supporting and creating an environment that will not encourage the gangsters and the criminals to go on with all this. In Albania, we have a very poor justice system. And even though we are doing like a reform of our justice, again, the criminals can find their way out and they can buy their influence. And when you don't see punishment, then this encourages all the things to go on. And in the faith community, because this is something very difficult in Albania, we choose to deny. And this happens even with the blood feud phenomenon that we are suffering in the north, because it is a mindset and is something that is bigger than our potential. And it is a whole mindset. We better deny it than accept that exists and then find ways how to fight it. So I would suggest that for us, here in Albania, one of the first steps to to work against this and to fight this and to support systems and create environments that even the girls that have gone in and they have been recruited, they can they can have an easy way out and they can have rehabilitation. That in Albania, I would say that it is impossible. We have here an honor and shame society. So if the girls want to come out, they will be disowned by their parents because they have put them in shame, and also they will be stigmatized by the society. So even if they rehabilitate, none of the companies, or they will not find a working place because of the profile they have. So the only way out for them is creating a future in the Western country when nobody knows them and nobody knows about their past. So yeah, to me, I totally agree with Sarah that we need to talk more and we need to see more around us. And if these people come from the most vulnerable community in our midst, then we should see more in these communities and be the voice for the voiceless. And also, I would suggest, like, with all the recruitment process, through the social media, how fast they have improved the way of the recruitment. We need to bear in mind all these things while we create policies and we approach to help in this kind of area and manner. So, and the other thing will be like, it would be great if we have in mind and being active to prevent and not punish, or rehabilitation is much more difficult than prevention. So it is good to be on time and to be fast to prevent this kind of thing and not waiting until we rehabilitate. I would say, like, it is better to be active than reactive. And if we have eyes to see around us the most vulnerable, we would be active to prevent what will be in front of them, with all the, like the poverty, the poor education and violence and gender inequality. So if we will work in all these areas, then we will be much more successful in prevention than rehabilitation.
Thank you very much, Elona. And one of the issues that you raised up there was very important, that we need to work with what we've got in our hands at the moment. But you spoke a lot there about children and girls in particular. And is there any systemic approaches, particularly with your neighbours and the EU? Is there any support that comes from outside of Albania that is positive, that is really helpful, particularly when we're talking about the G20? Do you get positive help, or is it you are marginalised in some ways as a state, and then obviously girls get more marginalised?
No, we have had thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars invested in our country to prevent all this. It is like we will have, like, I can give you a statistic. We have only one state shelter for the girls to, if they want to rehabilitate and to come out of the system. We've got only one governmental shelter, and the work will be more done by the non-profit organizations. Yeah, because corruption in Albania is so high, even the funds that are given toward this issue will be lost in the way, and you will not have a real difference and a real change in this area.
Thank you, Elona, and so good to hear your account from Albania and the work you're doing. Thank you very much. We now move on to Shandra Woworuntu, who I know very well. Shandra is a human rights defender and the CEO of Mentari, based in the New York City. She was born in Indonesia, and in 2001, she traveled to the USA expecting a job in hospitality industry, but instead she was forced into the sex industry and prostituted. She eventually escaped her captors and helped convict her traffickers. In 2011, Shandra was co-founder of the Voices of Hope, a survivors group based in New York. And on March the 20th, 2014, Governor Chris Christie appointed Shandra to be a Commission of Trafficking for the state of New Jersey. And then in 2015, President Obama appointed Shandra as one of 11 members of the first US Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. Shandra works with many groups as a voice for others. She actually is all the time working and the voice of victims, but also very much the voice of reason. In 2017, she was recognized by L'Oréal Paris as Women of the Worth National Honoree. She received the Daily Point Light Award from President G.W. Bush. As a survivor, advocate, and lobbyist, she has helped to pass local and federal anti-trafficking legislation and recognized as 2020 and 21 Power of Diversity, the most influential 100 Asian Americans in New York politics and policy. We're really pleased to have you here, Shandra. I know you very well, and I know how strong you are on this subject. So over to you, Shandra.
Thank you, Kevin. So let me start. First of all, I would like to thank to G20 Integrate Forum for hosting this conversation, especially back Kevin, who put the subject of modern slavery and human trafficking into the focus of G20 Integrate Forum. I love that. And I'm so proud that I'm here as a survivor of human trafficking. I'm invited to be a part of it. It means there is a survivor inclusion. Survivor voice will be contribute to the solution and action. Thank you so much. From the food that we eat, the coffee, tea that we drink, clothes that we wear, electronics that we use, all contain forced labor, child labor, cheap labor, every day in our life, exposed to the life of victims of exploitation and trafficking. We live in the same earth. We drink the same water and breathe the same air, regardless where we are. It means we have the same right as a human being to live and to be treated with respect and dignity. Last year, G20 concentrated on COVID-19 and development of vaccine. And this year, we concentrate G20 and the members, including Interfaith Forum, concentrate on the healing. Yes, it is needed. We need to heal our world. This is a broken world that we have to work together in our capacity as a human being. This is our duty to share love and care to other human beings. God loves us and our responsibility to love the creation. So lockdown increased exposure to pornography, and child sex abuse material will increase dramatically. The traffickers, the recruiters took advantage of this opportunity to recruit children and young adults with online commercial sexual activities and made a huge profit. And one of my work right now is try to pull down, to shut down Pornhub, which is the biggest porn industry, porn company in the world, that millions of subscription happening and a million of people watch people that abuse virtually. Last year, UN Women coordinate, collaborate, and partnered with OSCE on ODIHR, published guidance addressing emerging human trafficking trends and consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. And it is on OSCE website, and I encourage everybody to look at it, to start thinking our action as a faith group, as an interfaith group, because it will help us to understand what is the relation in COVID-19 and also human trafficking. So we also should look to help G20 focus on Sustainable Development Goal 8.7, which is to eradicate forced labor, child labor, and I encourage members to work proactively. Targets 5.2 calling. Target 5.2 calling that G20 members to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, and target 16.2 on ending abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence and torture children. We have to be a part of it, regardless what religion we are, what faith that we have, what belief that we have. We are human beings. Without working closely to identify the root causes and also the pattern of the recruitment itself, we fail. We fail to protect those who are vulnerable. We identify that women and children are the most vulnerable population. And actually, I have a friend. He is a pastor. His name Raleigh Sattler. That wrote a book about vulnerable. The title is Vulnerable. He laid out how to identify vulnerable people and how to love and care for them. So at this moment, actually, I'm very sad. I deeply concerned about the increase of violence, especially women and girls in Afghanistan. This is a violation of human rights. This is a violation of women's and children's rights. This situation can increase human trafficking activities and violence against women and girls, including pervasive abuse, forced labor, forced marriage, child marriage, sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, even child soldiers. Toward G20 members experienced the result of Afghanistan's conflict, where thousands tried to flee the country for their safety. It has created migration, immigration issues which economically impact G20 members, including the interfaith forum group and interfaith, community members. This is the real deal. This is the situation. And I would like to share a little bit about myself. Like Kevin mentioned, I'm a survivor. I grew up in Muslim family, and I became a Catholic when I was 5th grader, and my family became a Catholic. At that time, I don't have Bible. I don't have Bible to read. I just learned from listening the pastor or our nun told us about the story, Bible story. It will stick in my mind. During the political turbulence, I lost my job. I lost my job as a banker, and I was a young woman that having a position in in business, in the banking industry. And I was thinking, if I don't work, I will lose my saving. And I was a labor rights activist at that time. And I took opportunity to come to the US because I believe that US dollar is the power of the economy, of policy, of politics. And I decided to go. But the fact I was kidnapped and exploited, but my faith helped me to stay strong, even though at that time I was trapped. My faith helped me to overcome until I escaped, jumped from the 2nd floor bedroom window, that I possibly died. I didn't die. It was a miracle. By the grace of God, I was alive, and I still alive, speaking that He was my Savior. And how many children at that time, how many women that trafficked together with me have a similar fate like me? No. Victims, survivors lost their faith, lost their belief because of there is no hope. There wasn't any hope that provided. As a faith-based community, let's share that hope. Let's develop, let's share, let's love this vulnerable population and share our hope and care that we are here for them. When I escaped, I went to many churches seeking help. None of them identified if I was a victim. They call me prostitute. We have to change this language to identify if they are a victim. Even the prostituted woman, they are a victim of abuse. This is a gender-based violence issue that we have to talk about. And we talk about trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, we cannot put aside the discussion, the topic of prostitution. It is like the difference, like one piece of my hair, because of sex trafficking happening in the sex industry, in the sex trade. You know, people ask me, why don't you leave? How can I leave if there is no choice? This is not a choice. This is not a job that I deserve. This is abuse. This is constant rape. So this is what we have to identify as a faith community. I would like to call up that we have to see this victim, survivor, not only with our eyes, not only listening with our ear, but look at them with our heart, that we have to love people. How the way God loved me and I love people. Similar, God loved you and love them. So this is about me, and I took my my passion and compassion become an action, and I was able to help many people, a lot of people, just to be able to move from the victimization, become a survivor, and become who they are, they're able to experience freedom and live independently. Yeah, so that's about my work in anti-trafficking, and you can find me easily. And thank you for the opportunity to have me, and thank you for for hosting this event.
Thank you so much, Shandra. And when you speak, you talk about it from your heart and from experience. And you mentioned there about things that the G20 can do, and that's what this is. This is the Interfaith Forum for G20. And we've had questions come through about the internet. How can we put pressure on the internet to stop recruitment of trafficking? And we've spoken tonight about trade. We've spoken about girls. We've spoken about children, corruption, and systemic approaches to finances. And these are all subjects the G20 talk about. These are the kind of decisions they make, particularly around girls' education. And I'm sure that this G20 will focus on issues like Afghanistan, but also it's focusing a lot on climate. And we know that displaced people, because they don't have opportunities to work because of the temperatures and they can't grow things anymore, are moving, and then they become vulnerable. So the millions, nearly 70 million people displaced around the world at the moment have become a commodity for traffickers and exploiters. But I suppose something I would like to do is, we have G20 nations represented, but Luther, you're not in a G20 nation. You're in a small nation that has all the problems that the G20 is talking about. If you were to talk to, say, Frank, who is in the wealthiest European G20 nation, what would it be that you would ask Frank? What would you ask him for Germany to say and call for in those conversations at the G20? And of course, for the US to do as well, and the EU. So what would it be you'd be asking, Luther, to Frank and the wealthy nations of the world?
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I will say to Frank and the members of the G20, I live in a part of the world that I did not choose to live in, okay? I was put here that divine arrangement. But I speak as someone who life who have been completely in talents, completely buried, had not my mother being very bold, audacious, faith-pushing lady who fought hard for her son to have an education, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. What the G20 can do is to put a whole lot of pressure on African governments whose systemic weakness have exposed her citizens to all of these trafficking. Most time African countries like mine survive on grants from the G20 nations, on a lot of financial input. And I want to say, the way you can help regions like Africa, like my country, Liberia, is to tie your aid to ensuring the government strengthen their institutions to protect vulnerable people. And not to just throw money at African leaders who are very corrupt and care very less about their people. You have to be the voice for us, because our leaders do not have the moral ability to focus on the vulnerable. So the G20, in as much as they are very much wanting to see the third world developing country like Africa emerge out of poverty, you have to demand, you have to insist that the weak institutions like the judiciary system, the corruption, you have to tie your aid to seeing progressive move of government and ensuring that vulnerable people in the sex industry, in the cocoa and rubber plantations, these young vulnerable kids who have no one to speak for them, you have to insist that these things will be taken care of in order to have some kind of financial incentive. If you leave, it's sad to say it as an African, that if you leave the African governments to make the decisions to help their people, I'm afraid that the battle will be for the long haul. And if G20 nations will always tie financial incentives to ensuring that the judiciary and the vulnerables are protected, that would be a long way to help us.
Thank you,
also,
Luther.
not to only direct all of your attention through government. I said to the Swedish ambassador, I said, EU have a great heart, they want to help Africa, but sometimes identify some good people on the ground who are not in the government arena, but are doing a lot of good things, helping the vulnerable. Channel some of your funds through that instead of always channeling everything through government structure funding. That might help, because we are in the front line helping these kids, but at the end of the day, we don't have the money to be able to fight this battle and help redeem these children from these predators. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Luther. And I think Frank has heard that. And I think we're coming to the end of this session now. But I think that was an excellent way to end this session, because Luther, you've said and expressed there exactly what the G20 should be doing. You know, the G20 is about economy. It has 85% of the world's economy. It has 78%, I think, of the world's population. So it can really influence and change the world if it decides that's what it's going to do. And when we talk about the subjects today, you know, trade, that will be always top and high on the G20. But you've talked about some of the biggest companies in the world that are still not making things better where they're investing. And
Yes, sir.
this meeting today shows how connected it is, because as we've said, you know, these items and these products are produced and developed, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the United Kingdom, whether it's here in Ireland. And the G20 needs to bring that accountability. It needs to be talking about how change over time can actually start to push down exploitation, how it can start to challenge this. And I think it needs to be about prevention. You know, we do need to support people when they are exploited and when they're trafficked, but we need to really focus on prevention. And sometimes that has to be by regulation, like we see in Germany at the moment. And the fact that when the law changes in Germany, there will be a financial penalty available to the government. And also, as Frank has explained, the thresholds for entering into that area of responsibility are going to reduce over time. I think that is one of the best examples I've seen of how a government and how leadership can make a statement. And that statement, because of Germany's influence across the EU and influence in the world, will be felt and heard by many. So we need to really focus on these things for the G20, but making sure that we're talking about it in the sense of human beings, and as Frank has said on many times, human rights, and as we've heard all the people tonight present on about human rights. So I want to thank all our presenters tonight from across the world, all the people that joined us. We will be having a session at the G20 in Italy in September the 12th to the 14th. There will be a session we have during that period where we will again address these, but we'll be taking some of the points that were spoken tonight, some of the conversations, to influence and inform those discussions, and ultimately what we push to the G20 leaders and the discussions that they need to have, not just in Italy this year, but next year. And Shandra would be particularly interested in this, that it's in Indonesia next year and the year after in India, because this is a process. It's not just an event, but we need to be saying what needs to be done. We need to be very clear to leaders. This is where you can get change. The world has never been in a worse place than it is now in many ways. We have conflict at levels perhaps we've not seen before. We've got an international pandemic. We've got areas with economic problems. We've got displacement. We've got climate change. Well, now more than ever, it's up to people of faith, people of goodwill, people who have got ethics in their heart to decide that there needs to be change. And I think the G20 Interfaith Forum is one place that can really push that. So I want to thank all the panelists tonight for joining us. I want to thank people from around the world for being part of this. And let's hope that the G20 will play its part in making equality something that's a reality. And I hope that perhaps we can speak to Luther in years to come and he can say, more girls, more boys are being educated and fewer are being exploited. So thank you very much for joining us, and all the best, and God bless you all wherever you may be.